Howdy YouTubers, and welcome back to the Wholesome Missile channel and another episode in the login series. You know, some of you may have noticed I'm going to switch up the music in the intro to the series because I'm making a lot of money for Columbia Records with the old intro on some of the other episodes. So I decided, well, it's time to change up a little bit on the tunes and you know, allow my videos to make a little money for me. So with that, if you want to help out the channel in any meaningful way, by all means, please let the ads play. Grab yourself a cup of coffee or a cup of tea or a beer or a soda pop, whatever beverage of choice you might have, and while the ads are playing, and then you don't have to sit through the agony of having to watch the ads. But it helps out the channel immensely. So I do thank you for that if you do decide to let the ads go ahead and play. So on to today's theme. Today we're going to be doing a thorough setup of the chain grinder out of yesterday's video. Yesterday we just kind of gave it a cursory setup, you know, just kind of, you know, look the thing over, see how it is, how it's going to function, what problems, what issues it has. The one issue that we did find out right off the get-go was the grinding wheel itself was not running true. That was mainly due to the arbor. There's the arbor flange on there. The arbor itself, okay, I'm going to backtrack a little bit here. The motor on this thing is surprisingly good quality. I tore it completely down yesterday in order to ascertain any potential issues in the motor itself. There weren't any. I stuck a dial indicator on the arbor to see if there was any run out. The thing's dead nuts. So that part of it, I got to say, at least Gouda has their, or the factory in China that made this thing has their shit together. They actually did a fairly decent job of putting together a fairly decent little motor. The rest of the machine, well, it's going to have some issues. As time progresses, we're going to follow this thing through and update or modify some of the other existing parts, scrap the old ones, because this is all just die-cast zinc, aluminum, or whatever it is. It's just junk. It flexes a lot, and that creates an issue. You can make those issues work for you when you're grinding chain, but in the long term they actually work against you. So the thing to do is, of course, eliminate that from day one if you can. So one of the things I did yesterday, or this morning actually, is make a new arbor flange for it. At least the seat, the lid, the actual pressure flange on it is still the original, and it still runs out of round. So at some point in time I'm going to have to make a new one of those, and so that we can get rid of the imbalance on the arbor shaft itself, because that is making a large contribution towards the vibration that the machine is experiencing at present. So we're going to start today by looking at this little gauge. This is part of the kit. This is a profile gauge here in part, and then also there's some holes on here for file sizes. On the back side there's different pitches, you know, pitch gauges and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of a handy little, useful little tool if you don't have anything else. They have some depth gauges here for setting the rakers and all that kind of good jazz. Also, again, if you don't have anything else, not a bad little tool. However, there are better ones out there on the market that are relatively affordable. So at a later point in time, we'll go through rakers and so forth, because that's kind of a whole separate video into itself. Today we're going to go through the decent setup on this. We're going to dress the stone, check it with the gauge, and then sharpen the chain on this old saw over here. We'll show you how dull the teeth are, how dull they can get before you actually have to sharpen. You know, when they start throwing powder, when your chips are looking like powder more than, you know, a nice long curl, then it's time to get sharpen the chain. So anyway, I'll be doing some of the work on this other camera here, which is the picture quality about the same as, well, it's not the same, but it's close enough to the camera that we're working with here today. Today we got the new Legria going. So we're going to be using the old Legria, the little cheapie, for the close-up shots, just in case that you know, the lens might get damaged or something like that. I'd hate to have to take a brand new, you know, seriously expensive camera back in for repair to replace the lens, or you know, I don't have a filter on it. I just don't have any filters in that size, so we're just going to keep that one at a distance and this one up close. So the first step, of course, is to set up your to dress the stone. For that, you're going to have to take off the stone guard, and if you do that, what I've found is the holes that hold this thing on aren't really all that accurate. You know, the screws were binding up, taking them off, the whole thing was binding up. So what I did is I do have a set of plastic drills. Plastic drills have a different twist to them. The twist is a lot longer, and so I had them, so I used them and drilled out the holes, you know, slightly bigger than what the screws are. These are M5 screws that are holding that on there, so I took a 5.5 millimeter drill bit and drilled these out, so that way the screws will go on there a little easier. There's not as much binding. This part is rather brittle, so you got to be careful with it, not to bust it. Kind of a pain in the butt, but you know, it's just what it is. So anyway, with that, we're going to go ahead and get into dressing the stone. So the first step, first thing we're going to do is, of course, get out our little toolkit here. Here we have our wheel dresser. This is just kind of looks like a carborundum type of stone. It's not a CBN. It looks like a natural stone, but it's not. It's pressed. So then we're going to take our little gauge here. Need to find the appropriate thickness, so we're going to stick it on there. And of course, this is the middle profile for 3/8 chain. 3/8 are 404. I'm not sure if you can see that or not. Let's see, I'm going to try to get it in there to where you can see it. It's kind of tough in this light with this camera. There we go. So we've got 3/8 chain, so we're going to use the middle gauge here. And of course, that's the appropriate thickness for this stone. And we're just going to stick him on there. And normally this shouldn't hold on here, but you know, this is a cheap tool. It's just it is what it is. But we can see some daylight underneath here. I'm going to bring the camera around here so you can see that. Okay, now we've got the thing backlit, and as you can see down here, pardon the wobbly footage here, I'm freehanding it, but you can see a little bit of daylight down here on the bottom of the wheel, where the wheel profile is not matching the profile of the gauge. This gauge is relatively accurate, so it's not a bad idea to go ahead and follow that. So now we're going to fire the thing up and actually dress the stone and make it match the profile of the gauge. So now we're going to fire this thing up, and you'll hear it probably in the camera. As bad as the microphone is on this camera, of how much vibration you're going to have. Now, in order to dress the stone properly, you're going to have to hold it fairly tight, which means you're going to have to rest down here on the chain guide and dress the stone. You're going to pull the stone around like this. Some guys like to allow a groove to form in it, which is okay, I guess. It works too. So we're going to find, a side to work off of here, and then just kind of rock the stone back and forth and create that nice profile. And we're going to try to get to dress the stone out to where it doesn't vibrate and make so much noise anymore. So what I tried to do here in turning this is I found one spot that has a fairly decent, as you can see here, this thing is wobbling like a sheep's tail. There is quite a bit of a out around to this wheel. I'm not liking it at all. I'm probably going to go ahead and just go get a new one and toss this one pitch it over the bank down into the weeds, because it's not trying to true up. I got one little track on here that's kind of trued up, and so what I'm doing is I'm pulling that trued up track around to where the rest of the wheel will follow in. Sometimes that'll work really good. Unfortunately, with this little wheel here, this thing is being kind of cantankerous. It's not following in here, and my dressing stone is starting to get pretty toasty warm as well. So I'm going to continue on trying to get this thing rounded out. A cursory check here, and yeah, we still got daylight showing on the bottom. I've got a high spot over here on this side, so in order to get this nice and round, we're just going to have to continue working it until it conforms to the shape we need. So now we've gone through and dressed the stone. It runs fairly true. So now we're going to go ahead and set our pitch for the angle of the tooth here. Now this is the angle that lifts the chip up off the wood, and so we're going to set this at 35 degrees. That's usually a pretty good angle. You can set it at 60. 50 is usually pretty good in softwoods, or if you have a lot of clean wood. I don't recommend it for hardwoods, because hardwoods have a tendency to grab and bind up. So 35 is a good pitch on the angle of the dangle here. So now we're going to set up our cutting angle up here on the tooth. It's a little bit out of frame right now. Unfortunately, I have the camera up too close to get it all in frame, but I'll put a still in here as far as how this is going to look. You know, this cutting angle on top up here. Now, in softwoods, as I said before, 35-degree angle is pretty good. That's what it was set at when I pulled it, or 30 was what it set at pulling it out of the box. Now this chain had from the factory, this is Oregon chain. I normally don't buy it because I don't like it. It stretches too much for one, and then two, the metallurgy in it leaves a lot to be desired. It's just not very good chain. Other guys out there love it. I've had nothing but bad experiences with it. Again, tools made in China. So I normally buy the steel chain, which price-wise there's no big difference. But anyway, from the factory, this has a grind of 25 degrees, because when you pull down the stone here, you can see it coming in at the top of the frame here. I'll bring the camera around here so you can see what I'm talking about. You want to match that up as close to the original grind as you can, for various reasons. So let me bring the camera around here. So now you can see the top of the tooth right here. So we're going to bring the stone in. Let's see if it doesn't bump the camera here. Yeah, it's going to bump the camera and viewfinder. But anyway, you can see down here at the bottom of the tooth, I can't get my finger in there quite. Let me see if I got something else to point with here. Down right here, you can see there's, the stone is touching, and up here, there's a gap. So we want to close that gap, and so now we're going to go ahead down here on the bottom of the protractor is the old the knob. So we're going to set this. Like I said, I've already checked it out and it was 25 degrees, so we're going to go ahead and just set it to the 25 degrees on the protractor. So with this new spring thing, it's kind of a pain in the ass. I'm not really liking this system very well. So there we got it. Now again, you can set this pitch as well, the back and forth. There's some indicator marks back here on if you can see my finger, where the thing actually wants to be. I'm just going to leave it centered for right now, just for shits and grins, because I'm not going to get too crazy with this grind. So now I'm going to tighten it back up. You can go crazy and tighten the spring all the way down, and it just, so anyway, so now we got contact all the way across the front of the tooth. And so now we're going to go ahead and pull our chain back up against this finger. Now this finger, you want to center it on the tooth somewhat. I'm using let me zoom back here a little bit. Got this knob here to set the thing back and forth on the shaft. This is a little wobbly. It doesn't really make all that much difference, but if you can take some of the slop out of the system, it's going to make for a more accurate grind in the end. So you want to make sure that you can get as much slop of it out of there as you can. Now as you approach the end of the life of the tooth, you know, this is going to catch some of the stone will catch on some of this, and you're going to grind into this. So you're going to kind of watch out for a little bit, you know, for a while, and try to keep the stone from eating into that as much as you can. And so you want to pull this over as far as you can, you know, to keep the stone from contacting it. So then you grab the tail end of your chain just out of camera frame over here, and pull back against the finger, and then you tighten the cam lock here, and then Bob's your uncle. So now you can see there's a little bit, you can't quite see it. Let me get some other light on here. Maybe we can see it with some additional lighting. Sorry about the wobbly ear. Now you can barely make out there's a shadow. There's a little bit of a gap between the stone and the tooth. And so now we're going to go ahead with the cam lock slightly opened, and we're going to go ahead and push forward on the tooth. We're going to go ahead and unlock it and push ahead on it a little bit. Now we can pull the head down as well, and we're still a little bit too close, so we're going to go ahead and drop it all the way down into the cut and run our tooth up against the stone. So we got some resistance, so now we can set our depth here, pull our chain back, tighten the lock, and now we can see, okay, there's still some gaposis there. So again, process, you know, rinse and repeat to get the play out of the system. So now we're touching. So now we can go ahead and fire up the grinder and see where we're at. Now this is a good time to set your depth as well. And if we're down in the gullet, I'll bring the camera around to show you how to do that. So now's a good time to set the depth the gullet here, so we can run our stone down in without it running, and see how it's not, you know, till it touches. You don't want to be grinding as you're doing this for the initial setup, because you can always do some fine adjustments. So the adjustment knob for that is right over here. So we're going to go ahead and drop it down. Then we take our jam nut off a little bit and run this screw down until it touches. Now the further in you run this, it'll begin to lift the head up. So this is something you can play with in a in a still or in a non-moving situation. You just set this in here and go from there. Now here's one way you can see that the tooth is dull. When you look right here, let me see, I got something else to point with here. You can see right here on the tip how it's rounded off a little bit, and then it's a little shinier across the top edge of the tooth. So that indicates a nice dull tooth. In extreme cases you'll see some scoring, or even some, like with Oregon chain, the chrome on the top of the teeth likes to peel off. So that's one thing you got to watch for with Oregon chain. It's a weakness they've always had, and I never have liked it. So, but anyway, this tooth is dull, so I'm going to pull back the camera here and give this one a quick sharpening, and we'll go through the whole chain. And before I switch sides, I'll bring you guys back in. Now you don't need to really take off a whole lot on your first grind, especially if if your chain is fairly new and this is your first grind. I'm going to have to readjust my depth here a little bit. Just take off a smidge. These motors aren't very powerful, so they're not really designed to grind a whole lot off at one time. And then the other thing is you're going to burn up your tooth in doing so. And so if you have to make two passes, in other words, two run-throughs of the chain, that's fine. That's better than having to having a burnt tooth. So now we got a little bit of a burr right here on top of the tooth. I'm going to zoom in, maybe you can catch that, I don't know. So here you can see the burr just barely on the top of the tooth. And that's what you want to have. You don't want to have a big burr. You don't want to have no burr. You don't want to have this edge rounded off. So this tooth I would consider sharp. The corner over here looks good. You can see it kind of against my fingernail here. Let me see if I get the dirty part of the fingernail in here so you can see it a little better. Yeah, it's not going to work out too well. The camera's not really picking it up all that well. It looks to be a little bit dull just along the edge right here. But rest assured, when you run your fingernail across that, you can feel there's a burr there. Now, with some machines, you can actually eliminate the burr, but with this type of machine, the burr is going to form no matter what you do, and so you're kind of stuck with it. So, as you can see down here in the gullet, I'm down here, right here at the bottom, right here, our profile of the grinding wheel is such that right here at the bottom of the gullet, right on this side of the wrench, tip of the wrench, we haven't made any contact, but right here we have. And so, is it a big deal if you grind into the scrap? Well, not really, unless of course you grind clear down to the rivets. But in that case, your chain's toast anyway. But as long as you're getting down in the bottom of the gullet here and keeping out of the top of the strap, you're okay. So this is looking real good. And eventually, as the chain gets more age onto it and gets ground more often, this part of it right here will disappear, and it'll match the profile of the grinding wheel. Now, as I mentioned before, one of the characteristics of this machine is there's a lot of slop in this head, as it dips down. There's a lot of flex in it. And if your tooth doesn't manage to get sharp on that first pass, you can pull this wheel into the tooth just ever so slightly and, get it back into, get the tooth sharpened without having to go back and set your finger and all that kind of jazz. And you will see some movement from time to time, so then you just go ahead and give that. The one thing that I will do with this thing later on is I'm going to be running this is a 1.5 millimeter, so it's a 53 gauge chain on the drivers. So I'm going to be making the appropriate washers on the ends here for spacers, so that way when you clamp down on this thing, you're not really having to reef down on it all that hard. Sometimes when you reef down on it, you know, the whole system moves, and that's not very optimal. I'm going kind of slow motion here. Normally I'd whip through this thing. It takes about 5 to 6 minutes to whip through a saw chain like this with some practice. So see, here's a little bit of, I got a little bit of burr on the outside, but not up here at the tip. So now I'm gonna put a little gronk on the handle here and pick up that corner, and now the corner's sharp again. That's one of the ways you can cheat. I don't recommend you do that, but that's one of the ways you can cheat with these type of machines. Now you don't want to sit there and hold the wheel into it. That puts a lot of heat into your tooth and turns it blue. So you just want to go, you know, touch it shortly, so you're not having a constant heat going into your tooth. By dipping it in there, you're allowing that heat to disperse. It doesn't take long for these things to heat up or for the heat to disperse. So you definitely want to make sure that you're allowing that heat to go away. So now we've come full circle on the chain here. So the last tooth that we grind in here, now this is the original tooth that we started out with. Just give them kind of another touch up, maybe grind one or two more back, you know, beyond that, just to make sure that, you know, you've got a nice overlap of the grind. If you want, you can actually give them at the same setting another pass. That equalizes the teeth, keeps them all one nice even length. So I've gone past that, so now we're ready to switch to the other side. So that's basically all we, you know, going to do on that side. So what we're going to do is run this out a little bit, run our finger out so that the back side of this is kind of up against it. We don't want to set anything on as far as the distance. We want to keep that the same. Then we're going to go ahead and tighten her back up. And now on the bottom down here, we're going to go ahead and loosen the knob and set him to 25 degrees on the other side. Now this thing has got some positive clicks, as you might be able to hear in there, and so we're going to just go to the 25 degree mark, allow this floaty boaty here to kind of settle in, and tighten him up as good as we can. Now this is one of these anti-kickback chains. I do not like them because when you're going to file your rakers, and I'll get into the rakers in a different video, these stupid things really get in the way. So pain in the ass. If you can avoid buying this crap, by all means do. Well, YouTubers, I hope you were able to glean a little useful information out of this little episode so far. There are going to be more videos on this subject, because chain sharpening is a science unto itself. So there's several different aspects. There's rakers, there's pitches, there's you know, a whole slew of topics on this, and I'll try and get, you know, into them more in depth in coming videos. There's also going to be a build video on a different kind of grinder where we're going to copy a Sylvie's Razor Sharp 2. So stay tuned for that. And then we're also going to build a bar grinder, a bar rail grinder, similar to what Sylvie used to put out. I have that at home in the States, and so I don't have access to it right now, but I need that in my arsenal, and so I'm going to probably make one with a 3-phase motor, but again, that's coming up the next year, maybe 2, so stay tuned for that. The next video in this series is going to be on rakers because that's an in-depth subject, and so it requires a video all unto itself. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about different defects in the chain, or I should say grinding defects. Now if your chain is cutting to one side or the other, you know, it doesn't matter. You might see it drift off to the right or to the left, but it's a constant. Then there's something wrong with the chain itself, where it's pulling to one side or another, and that can be one of several causes or several at once. One can be that some of the teeth on one side, i.e. the side that's pushing the chain away, aren't cutting because they haven't been sharpened enough, or they've been over sharpened, or they're not lifting off as big a chip, meaning the rakers aren't allowing the tooth to cut the same amount of material as the other side. And the other cause for that can be that the pitch on the angle of the tooth on one side is a little more than it is on the other, and usually the steeper side will hog a little more material. So if you have on your protractor, these things are notoriously inaccurate. So it may be that when you go back and when you initially, if you have a new chain and you put it on the machine initially, and you start setting up your protractor, make sure that when you're looking at it, where your protractor needle is pointing, when that gap closes up, because it may very well be that you might be a half a notch off, and so if you go to 25 degrees on one side and then go to the 25 degrees on the other, it may be off, where you're going to be looking at it going because the factory grind is usually pretty accurate, so that's a good baseline to have. And then also on these things here, these little tools they give you, there are also little angle pitches that you can orient by on this. And then also on your raker gauge, there's also guides for doing your rakers. Those things also have those pitches on there, and it shows you exactly where you're at, so you can check that against the known angle and make sure that you're still on track. So the other thing that I wanted to mention is if you have if you hit a rock or a little patch of dirt, like this tooth right here, now, as you notice, there's a little shiny, knob essentially on the very tippy top of it. Now, I went ahead and ground that tooth to the same standard as all the rest, and right here you can see that there's still a little bit of that initial damage left. Now, I'm not going to grind that out completely, because then what's going to happen is if I have, say, one or two teeth like that, and I end up grinding all that out, then I have to go back and reset my finger, the depth gauge and so forth. Not really optimal. At some point in time, that ding is going to grind out. So you want to leave that alone. Just grind it with the same fervor that you do in your other teeth with. And then that way you're not going to wear your chain out prematurely, because if you start grinding that away, sooner or later, the teeth will start falling off on the chain. If you're going to follow this channel, you'll see later on, how far I've had chains where 4 or 5 teeth come flying off of it. So I grind them down to where there's hardly anything left, and then when the teeth fall off, that's when I pitch the chain. But until then, I'm going to get the goodie out of it. But those teeth are usually the ones that were ground a little excessively. Even from the factory, these teeth aren't uniform. So don't think, you know, just because it came from the factory that everything is going to be just absolutely perfect. It's generally not, especially when it comes to Oregon chain. Steel chain, yes, those grinds, that chain is more uniform, although there are some tolerances in there. Usually it's in the, you know, in the thousandths of millimeter range, but with Oregon, you know, made in China, quality control. But anyway, enough of that rant. So anyway, I hope you guys were able to glean a little something useful out of this whole thing today. If you have any thoughts, comments, critiques, suggestions, or other thoughts, by all means put them in the comment section below. A little bit of traffic in there definitely helps the channel grow. I do thank all the new subscribers that have came on board. Hopefully there's, you know, not just one subject that you might be interested in the channel. There's a whole slew of other things, so by all means go into the archive, check it out. Some of my initial videos really aren't that great. You know, it's an evolutionary process, so I do ask your patience, you know, if some of the older videos aren't really all that good qualitatively, you know, from the subject matter and from the explanation. I try as best as I can to explain a subject. Maybe sometimes I over-explain, but anyway, there's a whole slew of other subjects that might interest you, you know, travel, what have you. So go and check that out, and you know, maybe there's something in there to your liking. So in the next video, we're going to be putting the chain back on the bar, and I'll be showing you some of the do's and don'ts of that. There's a lot of things that you can do to your chain, to your bar, that will cause a lot of premature wear that you want to try to avoid at all costs. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If there's anything on your mind, by all means, comments in the comment section below. And with that, I thank you for stopping by, and hope to see you all again soon.